My daughter's wedding planner pulled me aside. The groom is after her inheritance. I smiled as he toasted with our family's rarest crystal. During the mother-daughter dance I whispered, "Let him laugh tonight, sweetheart. By sunrise he'll realize. Some absences are deliberate." The morning sun streamed through the cathedral windows, casting golden rays across empty pews that would soon fill with guests. I stood in the bridal suite doorway, watching my daughter Emma adjust her veil for the 100th time. Her hands trembled, not with excitement but with something else. Something I recognized from my own reflection 30 years ago when I married her father. "Mom, do you think Zach will make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I forced a smile, the same practiced expression I'd perfected through decades of charity galas and business dinners. "Sweetheart, you know your brother. He'll be here when it matters." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they weren't true. Zach's chair would remain empty today and every guest would notice. They always did when something was missing from a picture that should have been perfect. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me. If you believe in the power of protective love and family bonds, please subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more people who need these stories. The empty seat that no one dared to ask about became the elephant in the room before the ceremony even began. I watched as guests filtered in, their eyes inevitably drawn to the front row where Zach should have been sitting. Aunt Margaret leaned over to whisper something to my sister-in-law, their heads bobbing in that conspiratorial way that made my teeth clench. Cousin Robert kept glancing at the vacant chair like it might suddenly produce my son. When Daniel's groomsman asked about it, he just shrugged with that easy charm of his. "You know how it is with corporate travel," he said, adjusting his boutonniere. "Zach's probably closing some deal in Tokyo right now." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. Almost. But I knew better. I knew exactly where my son was, and more importantly, I knew why he wasn't here. Daniel was charming. Devastatingly so. The kind of charming that made waitresses blush and elderly ladies pat his arm approvingly. But I'd spent 45 years reading people, first in boardrooms, then at PTA meetings, and finally across dinner tables where million-dollar deals were disguised as casual conversation. His charm felt manufactured, like cologne sprayed too heavily to cover something unpleasant underneath. During the ceremony, I watched him work the crowd with his eyes even while promising to love my daughter forever. He winked at her college roommate during the vows. He nodded approvingly at my business partner when the minister mentioned financial security. When he slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, I swear I saw him glance at her tennis bracelet, the one that had belonged to my grandmother, with the same look a jeweler gives when appraising merchandise. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced, and Daniel did, with just enough passion to make the crowd sigh appreciatively. But his hand, I noticed, lingered on the pearl necklace at Emma's throat. The one worth more than most people's cars. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been my first real glimpse behind his mask. We'd reserved the private dining room at the country club, complete with crystal chandeliers and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. Emma had insisted on perfection and I'd given it to her, even though each detail felt like another nail in a coffin I couldn't yet name. Daniel held court at the head table, regaling everyone with stories about his consulting work, his travels, his ambitious plans for the future. "Emma's going to make the perfect wife," he announced, raising his glass of our finest champagne. "She's got such a generous heart. Sometimes too generous, if you know what I mean." The table laughed politely, but I felt ice form in my chest. Emma's cheeks flushed pink and she laughed along, but it was the kind of laugh you make when you're trying to convince yourself something isn't wrong. "She's always been the emotional one in the family," Daniel continued, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Good thing she's got me to keep her grounded, right?" I watched my daughter's smile falter for just a moment before she fixed it back in place. 26 years of being her mother, and I could read every micro-expression that crossed her face. That wasn't happiness. That was resignation wrapped in Vera Wang's silk. My fingers tightened around my wine glass until I worried it might shatter. Around the table, family members nodded and chuckled, oblivious to the subtle cruelty in his words. But I heard it. The way he diminished her while pretending to praise her. The way he positioned himself as her savior rather than her partner. The wedding planner, Margaret Chen, had been coordinating society events for 15 years. I'd worked with her on 3 charity galas, and she had an impeccable reputation for discretion. which is why her approach before the ceremony shocked me to my core. She appeared at my elbow as I stood near the altar, checking that the flower arrangements were positioned correctly. Her usually professional demeanor had cracked, revealing something almost frantic underneath. "Mrs. Wellington," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I need to tell you something and I hope you'll forgive me for overstepping." My heart began to race, though I kept my expression neutral. "What is it, Margaret?" She leaned closer, her voice barely audible above the organ music. "It's about Daniel. I've been in this business long enough to recognize certain patterns. The questions he's been asking about your family's assets, the way he's been researching property values in your neighborhood. Ma'am, I don't think he's marrying Emma for love." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of me had been expecting them. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's marrying for the inheritance," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the bridal suite where Emma was making final preparations. "I've seen it before. The charm, the rushed timeline, the way he talks about securing their future. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. I stood there for a moment, feeling the cathedral walls close in around me. The morning sun suddenly felt cold against my skin, and the scent of lilies became overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "For telling me." Margaret nodded quickly and disappeared into the crowd of vendors and family members, leaving me alone with the truth I'd been trying to avoid for months. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't march into the bridal suite and demand that Emma call off the wedding. Instead, I did what I'd always done when faced with impossible situations. I smiled, straightened my shoulders, and walked back to my seat in the front row, right next to that empty chair that suddenly felt like an omen. The mother-daughter dance came near the end of the reception, after Daniel had charmed every guest, kissed every grandmother, and posed for what felt like thousands of photographs. The band struck up "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song I'd danced to at my own wedding, and Emma floated into my arms like she was still my little girl, asking me to twirl her around the living room. For a moment, surrounded by the soft glow of candlelight and the gentle murmur of our guests, I almost forgot about Margaret's warning. Almost forgot about the calculated way Daniel's eyes tracked every piece of jewelry, every family heirloom on display. Almost forgot about Zach's empty chair and all the reasons behind it. But as we swayed together, I felt the weight of motherhood settle on my shoulders like a familiar coat. The responsibility to protect my daughter even from herself. Even from choices she'd already made. I pulled her closer, close enough that my lips brushed her ear as we turned. "Let him laugh tonight, sweetheart," I whispered, the words coming from some deep, protective place I didn't even know existed. "By sunrise he'll realize. Some absences are deliberate." Emma pulled back slightly, confusion clouding her eyes. "Mom? What do you mean?" But I just smiled and continued dancing, letting the music carry us through the rest of the song. She wasn't ready for the truth yet. Neither was Daniel, sitting at the head table watching us with that proprietary smile of his. The evening air felt different as guests began to leave, couples walking hand in hand to their cars while Daniel posed for final photographs. I stood on the terrace watching my new son-in-law work the crowd, and I thought about absence. About the things we choose not to say, the people we choose not to invite, the truths we choose not to reveal. Zach's empty chair had spoken louder than any speech tonight. And tomorrow, Daniel would finally understand what that silence had been trying to tell him. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, just as I was settling into my leather armchair with a cup of chamomile tea and the quarterly financial reports. The house felt cavernous without Emma's laughter echoing through the halls. She'd moved in with Daniel 3 months prior, claiming they needed to test-drive domestic life before the wedding. My phone buzzed against the mahogany side table. Zach's name appeared on the screen, which struck me as odd. My son rarely called during weeknights, preferring to save our conversations for Sunday morning coffee when he could give me his full attention. "Mom, I need you to sit down." His voice came through the speaker, steady but strained in a way that made my chest tighten. I was already seated, but something in his tone made me set down my teacup with deliberate care. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I've been helping Emma organize some of her old files from college. You know how she keeps everything in those banker's boxes in the garage?" His words came slowly, like he was choosing each one with surgical precision. "I found something. Actually, someone found me." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of unspoken dread. Zach had inherited my methodical nature, never one to dramatize or exaggerate. If he was calling with this kind of gravity, something was genuinely wrong. There's an email thread, Mom. Between Daniel and... He paused and I heard him take a shaky breath. Between Daniel and Lila. The name hit me like ice water. Lila Martinez, Emma's college roommate, maid of honor at her graduation party, the girl who'd spent countless holidays at our dinner table. The same Lila who'd vanished from Emma's life 2 years ago without explanation, leaving my daughter confused and heartbroken over the sudden loss of her closest friendship. Lila. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. But she and Emma haven't spoken since. Since she started dating Daniel, Zach finished. Mom, these emails, they're not old. They're current. And they're not friendly. My hands found the arms of my chair, gripping the worn leather as the room seemed to tilt around me. What kind of emails? The kind that prove Emma was never his first choice. Zach had always been thorough, a trait that served him well in his forensic accounting career. What he'd discovered in those next few hours of digital archaeology painted a picture so devastating that I found myself grateful Emma wasn't there to witness my reaction. The email thread stretched back 14 months, beginning just 2 weeks after Daniel and Emma's first date. The messages started innocuously enough, Daniel reaching out to apologize for how things ended between him and Lila. But they quickly evolved into something far more sinister. I need more time, read one message from Daniel, dated 3 months into his relationship with Emma. The trust fund situation is more complicated than I thought. She's not as naive as she appears. Lila's response had been devastating in its clarity. You promised me 6 months, Daniel. I can't keep pretending I don't exist while you play house with my best friend. But perhaps the most damning evidence came in the form of a spreadsheet attachment. A detailed financial analysis of my family's assets that Daniel had compiled with the precision of a forensic auditor. Property values, investment portfolios, the estimated worth of family heirlooms. Everything itemized and calculated down to the last dollar. He wasn't just dating her, Mom, Zach explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. He was conducting a financial audit disguised as a romance. The hotel receipts told their own story. Every business trip Daniel claimed to take, every weekend conference that kept him away from Emma, had been spent in hotel rooms across the city with Lila. The dates aligned perfectly with Daniel's absences, creating a timeline of deception that left me breathless. Most revealing was a cancelled jewelry appraisal from Tiffany & Company, dated just 1 week before Daniel proposed to Emma. The appointment had been for an engagement ring, but not the one currently sitting on my daughter's finger. This ring was being appraised for resale value, suggesting Daniel had originally purchased it for someone else entirely. When Zach reached out to Lila, her response had been immediate and devastating. She agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown, away from any chance encounters with mutual acquaintances. Zach described her as a shadow of the vibrant girl I remembered, hollow-eyed and brittle, like someone carrying a secret too heavy for her frame. He told me Emma was just a rebound, Lila had confessed through tears. That he needed time to process our relationship but that she meant nothing. He said she was too sheltered, too dependent on her family's money to ever be truly independent. The cruelest revelation was that Lila had learned about the engagement the same way everyone else had, through Emma's social media announcement. No warning, no explanation. Just the sudden, devastating realization that the man she'd been secretly seeing for over a year was marrying her former best friend. I wanted to call Emma so many times, Lila had told Zach. But what could I say? That I'd been sleeping with her fiancé? That everything she thought she knew about their relationship was a lie. But it was the unopened envelope that Zach found tucked between the printed emails that revealed Daniel's true intentions. Addressed to Lila in Daniel's distinctive handwriting, it contained a plane ticket to Barcelona and a hotel reservation, both dated for the day after the wedding. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. Once I have access to the trust, we can disappear together. Emma will be devastated, but she'll recover. He always does. Pack light, we won't be coming back. The note was dated 2 weeks before Daniel's proposal, revealing a level of premeditation that made my stomach churn. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated heist disguised as a love story. Zach's voice broke as he read the note aloud over the phone. Mom, he's planning to take everything and run. The wedding isn't the ending, it's just the beginning of the real theft. I sat in my chair long after Zach finished talking, staring at the family photographs arranged on the mantelpiece. Emma's graduation picture smiled back at me, her arm linked with Lila's, both girls beaming with the confidence of young women who believed the world was full of endless possibilities. What do we do? I finally asked, though part of me already knew the answer. We don't tell her, Zach said firmly. Not yet. If we confront him now, he'll just disappear and we'll never be able to prove anything. But if we let him think he's won, we can catch him in the act, I finished. Exactly. But Mom, we need to move fast. The wedding is in 6 months, and once he has legal access to Emma's assets, he'll be gone before she realizes what happened. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, mapping out a strategy that would protect my daughter while ensuring Daniel faced the consequences of his deception. The moon cast long shadows across the pages as I worked, and with each line I wrote, I felt the familiar surge of protective fury that had carried me through Emma's childhood's scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. But this was different. This wasn't a playground bully or a thoughtless teenage boy. This was a predator who had studied my family like a business acquisition, who had weaponized my daughter's capacity for love against her. By morning I had a plan. And by evening Zach and I had begun to implement it. The game had begun, but Daniel didn't know he was no longer the only player at the table. The next morning I called Richard Pemberton before my coffee had even finished brewing. Richard had been handling our family's legal affairs for 23 years, ever since my husband's passing, and I trusted him with secrets that could topple governments, or in this case, destroy a carefully constructed fraud. Margaret, it's barely 7 a.m., Richard's gravelly voice answered on the second ring. This must be serious. Richard, I need an emergency appointment. Today. And I need complete discretion. There was a pause, then the sound of papers rustling. How emergency are we talking? Scale of 1 to 10. 11. 2 hours later, I sat across from Richard's mahogany desk in his downtown office, watching his expression grow increasingly grim as I laid out everything Zach had discovered. The emails, the hotel receipts, the plane tickets. Each piece of evidence landed on his desk like a chess piece being positioned for checkmate. Good Lord, Margaret, he muttered, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. This isn't just fraud. It's systematic deception with clear intent to commit theft. Can we stop it legally? Richard leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. We can do better than stop it. We can create a trap so legally sound that even the best defense attorney couldn't find a crack. The first move was restructuring Emma's trust fund. What Daniel didn't know, what Emma herself didn't fully understand, was that her inheritance wasn't automatically accessible upon marriage. The original trust had been designed with protective clauses, but they weren't nearly robust enough to handle someone as calculating as Daniel. We're adding a 5-year marriage requirement, Richard explained as he pulled up the trust documents on his computer. No access to principal or significant distributions unless the marriage remains intact for a full 5 years. Any attempt to divorce or separate during that period triggers an automatic review of the beneficiary's intentions. I watched him type the new clauses, each word a nail in Daniel's coffin. What if he contests it? He can't contest what he doesn't know exists, Richard smiled grimly. This amendment is retroactive to last month, well before any engagement announcements. As far as the law is concerned, these protections were always in place. While Richard worked on the trust modifications, I reached out to Jennifer Walsh, our estate planning attorney. If Richard was a scalpel, Jennifer was a sledgehammer. Precise when needed, devastating when required. Margaret, darling, Jennifer's voice was warm but professional. Richard briefed me on the situation. I have to say, this is the most elaborate con I've encountered in 15 years of practice. Can you help us? Help you? Sweetheart, I'm going to gift wrap this man's downfall. The estate modification was elegant in its simplicity. Jennifer drafted an addendum to our family will that would automatically exclude any beneficiary who entered marriage under false pretenses. The language was carefully crafted to be ironclad yet invisible, buried in subsection 12 of a 30-page document that most people would never read completely. Any beneficiary who misrepresents their intent to marry for financial gain shall forfeit all claims to inheritance, gifts, or family assets, Jennifer read aloud as she finalized the document. It's beautiful, really. Completely legal, impossible to challenge, and retroactively applied to any marriages occurring within 12 months of this filing. But the most crucial element was the evidence gathering. Zach had become our secret weapon, using his forensic accounting skills to build an unshakable case. Every evening after work he would arrive at my house with new discoveries, each more damning than the last. "Lila's been incredibly helpful," he reported during one of our clandestine meetings. "She saved everything." Voice messages where Daniel explicitly talks about Emma's family money. Text conversations where he jokes about playing the long game. Even photos of documents he showed her, including a handwritten list of our family assets that he compiled while supposedly helping Emma organize her closet. The voice recordings were particularly devastating. In one message recorded just 3 weeks before the proposal, Daniel's voice dripped with calculated charm. "Baby, I know this is hard, but think about what we'll have once I secure the trust fund. We're talking generational wealth here. Emma's nice enough, but she's just a means to an end." Lila had also provided something even more valuable: Daniel's calendar entries from his phone, which he'd shared with her during their relationship. The entries revealed a disturbing pattern of strategic planning. "Coffee with ease, mom, charm offensive," read one entry. Another noted, "research family charity connections, potential networking opportunities." But perhaps most chilling was an entry from 2 months ago. "Convince E to add me to investment accounts. Marriage equals full access." He's been documenting his own crime, Zach marveled as he showed me the screenshots. "It's like he wanted to get caught." "Arrogance," I replied simply. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone else." The next phase required delicate timing. We needed to ensure Emma remained unaware of our activities while simultaneously protecting her from Daniel's manipulation. This meant maintaining normal family interactions while secretly dismantling his entire plan. I began subtly questioning Emma about their financial discussions during our weekly lunch dates. "Have you and Daniel talked about combining your accounts after the wedding?" I asked casually over Caesar salads at her favorite bistro. Emma's face brightened. "Actually, yes. He's been so sweet about it. He said he wants to handle all the complicated financial stuff so I don't have to worry about it." "Isn't that thoughtful?" My heart clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. "Very thoughtful. What kind of arrangement are you considering?" He suggested adding him to my investment accounts right after the honeymoon. Something about streamlining our financial planning. She paused, twirling pasta around her fork. "He even offered to take over managing the trust fund distributions. Said I shouldn't burden myself with all those complicated documents." Every word confirmed our worst fears. Daniel wasn't just planning to access Emma's money. He was systematically positioning himself to control every aspect of her financial life. Meanwhile, Zach had enlisted Lila's help in gathering even more evidence. She agreed to meet Daniel one final time, wearing a recording device provided by Richard's private investigator. The conversation that resulted was so incriminating that even I was shocked by Daniel's callousness. "Once we're married, I'll have legal access to everything," Daniel's recorded voice explained to Lila. "The trust fund, the investment accounts, even her grandmother's jewelry collection. We just need to be patient for a few more months." "What about Emma?" Lila had asked. "Don't you feel guilty at all?" Daniel's laugh was cold and mechanical. "Guilty? She's getting what she wants. A wedding, a husband, the whole fairy tale. She'll survive the heartbreak. Rich girls always do." The recording device had captured every word with crystal clarity, providing us with evidence that would hold up in any court of law. As the wedding date approached, I found myself living a strange double life. During the day, I was the supportive mother of the bride, attending dress fittings and cake tastings with genuine enthusiasm for Emma's happiness. But in the evenings, I was a general planning a war, coordinating with attorneys and investigators to ensure Daniel's scheme would collapse the moment he tried to execute it. The most difficult part was watching Emma's excitement grow daily while knowing the truth about the man she was preparing to marry. She would call me with updates about their honeymoon plans, their apartment hunting, their dreams for the future. All built on foundations that would crumble within hours of saying "I do." But every time I was tempted to tell her everything, I remembered Richard's warning. If we tip our hand too early, Daniel will disappear. Better to let him hang himself with his own rope. 3 weeks before the wedding, we filed all the documents. The trust modifications, the estate amendments, the evidence packages. Everything was legally secured and time-stamped. Daniel's trap was set, baited with the very greed that had driven him to target my daughter in the first place. That night, I stood on my terrace overlooking the garden where Emma would soon exchange vows with a man who saw her as nothing more than a financial opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were allowing the wedding to proceed precisely because we wanted to protect her. Sometimes love means watching someone walk into danger, knowing you've already cleared the path behind them. The wedding reception unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance, each moment timed to create maximum emotional impact. As guests settled into their seats for dinner, Daniel stood at the head table, commanding attention with the natural confidence of someone who believed he'd already won the ultimate prize. The crystal champagne flute in his hand caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above, our family's baccarat stemware, reserved for only the most significant celebrations. Each piece was worth more than most people's monthly salary, and Daniel held his like a trophy he'd earned rather than a privilege he'd been granted. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried across the ballroom without need for amplification. The conversations died down, replaced by the expectant silence of guests preparing to witness what they assumed would be a heartfelt declaration of love. I watched from my position at the family table, my own champagne untouched, as Daniel's smile widened. There was something predatory in his expression, the look of a hunter who'd successfully cornered his prey. When I first met Emma, he began, his free hand finding her shoulder possessively, I knew I'd found something rare. Something precious that needed proper care and guidance. The words made my stomach turn. Even in his wedding toast, he couldn't help but position himself as Emma's superior, her protector, her guide. Around me, guests smiled benevolently, hearing romance where I heard condescension. To forever, Daniel raised his glass higher, the crystal singing a pure note as it caught the light. To building something beautiful together. To securing our future. The word, securing, hit me like a physical blow. Even now, surrounded by our family and friends, he couldn't resist a subtle reference to his true motivation. Cameras flashed like lightning as he leaned down to kiss Emma's cheek, his lips lingering just long enough to make the photographers happy. I lifted my own glass with trembling fingers, the smile I'd perfected over decades of society functions firmly in place. Around me, guests applauded and cheered, completely unaware that they were celebrating the beginning of an elaborate theft. But as Daniel basked in the applause, his eyes swept the room with the calculating gaze I'd learned to recognize. He was counting guests, mentally cataloging influential faces, already planning how to leverage these connections for future opportunities. Zach's empty chair at our family table seemed to grow more prominent as the evening progressed. It sat like a question mark in the midst of celebration, drawing curious glances and whispered speculations from guests who knew our family well enough to notice the absence. Mrs. Henderson from the country club leaned over during the second course. Margaret dear, where's Zach this evening? I was so looking forward to seeing him. Business travel, I replied smoothly, the lie now rehearsed to perfection. You know how demanding his work can be. But Daniel's explanation to his groomsmen had been different, more revealing of his character. I'd overheard him near the bar, gesturing dismissively toward the empty chair. Zach's got some issues with commitment, he'd said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Probably couldn't handle seeing his sister actually follow through with something important. The casual cruelty of the comment took my breath away. Here was my son who'd spent months protecting his sister from a predator, being dismissed as unreliable by the very man whose crimes he'd uncovered. As the evening wore on, Daniel's behavior became increasingly revealing to those who knew how to look. During the dinner service, I watched him charm the elderly widows at table 6, paying particular attention to Mrs. Ashford, whose late husband had left her a considerable art collection. You absolutely must show me your Monet sometime, Daniel was saying, his hand placed respectfully on her arm. I've been studying Impressionist investments lately. Fascinating market. Mrs. Ashford beamed under his attention, completely missing the way his eyes assessed her diamond tennis bracelet while he spoke about art appreciation. Later, while Emma freshened her makeup, I witnessed Daniel's conversation with my business partner's son, a recent Harvard MBA who managed several hedge funds. The Wellington family has such interesting investment strategies, Daniel mentioned casually. Emma's grandmother was particularly savvy with her portfolio choices. I'd love to learn more about the family's approach to wealth preservation. Each conversation was carefully orchestrated, each question designed to gather intelligence about our financial landscape. Daniel wasn't just celebrating his wedding, he was conducting reconnaissance for his future heist. But perhaps most disturbing was overhearing his phone call during a brief break between courses. He'd stepped onto the terrace, thinking himself alone, when his voice drifted through the French doors. "Everything's going perfectly," he said quietly into his phone. "The trust fund transfer should be accessible within the week. Yes, I have the account numbers." No, she suspects nothing. I pressed myself against the wall inside the ballroom, my heart pounding as I realized he was likely speaking to Lila, confirming their escape plans even as he celebrated his marriage to my daughter. When the band announced the mother-daughter dance, I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders like a velvet cloak. This would be my last chance to prepare Emma for what was coming. Not the details, which would have been too devastating, but the emotional foundation she'd need to survive it. As "The Way You Look Tonight" began to play, Emma floated into my arms like she had as a little girl, back when her biggest problems could be solved with band-aids and bedtime stories. "You look radiant tonight, sweetheart," I whispered, meaning every word. Despite everything I knew about Daniel, despite the elaborate trap we'd set, Emma genuinely glowed with happiness. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she whispered back, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. We swayed together in comfortable silence for several measures before I felt compelled to plant the seed that might help her understand what was coming. "Emma," I said softly, pulling her closer so my words would reach only her ears. "No matter what happens in the coming days, remember that sometimes the people who love us most have to make difficult choices to protect us." She pulled back slightly, confusion clouding her features. "Mom, what do you mean?" "Just remember that love sometimes looks like letting go," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "And sometimes, sweetheart, the absence of someone we expect to be there is the greatest gift they can give us." Emma's brow furrowed, but before she could ask more questions, the song was ending and Daniel was approaching to claim his dance with his new bride. As I returned to my seat, I caught Daniel watching me with narrowed eyes. For just a moment, his charming mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. He'd heard something in my tone, sensed some undercurrent he couldn't quite identify. But then Emma was in his arms, and his practiced smile returned as cameras captured their first dance as husband and wife. He spun her gracefully, dipped her dramatically for the photographers, and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh. I sat at the family table, fingering the stem of my crystal champagne flute, and watched the man who thought he'd just secured his fortune dance with my daughter. Tomorrow he would discover that some victories are hollow, that some prizes come with prices he'd never anticipated paying. The empty chair beside me seemed to pulse with invisible energy, a reminder that the most important battles are often fought by those who choose to remain unseen. As the last dance ended and guests began filtering toward the exit, Daniel caught my eye across the dance floor. He raised his crystal flute one final time in my direction, a gesture I recognized as both gratitude and triumph. I smiled and raised my own glass in return, knowing it would be the last toast we'd ever share. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains of the honeymoon suite at the Grand Marquis Hotel, casting golden streaks across rumpled Egyptian cotton sheets. Daniel stirred slowly, his arm reaching across the king-sized bed for the warmth of his new bride, only to find cold, empty space where Emma should have been. His eyes snapped open, immediately scanning the opulent room that had cost more per night than most people earned in a month. The silence was deafening. No shower running, no soft humming from the bathroom, no gentle rustling of silk pajamas that he'd grown accustomed to during their cohabitation. "Emma." His voice cracked slightly, still rough with sleep and champagne from the night before. "Nothing." Daniel sat up abruptly, his head spinning from the sudden movement and the remnants of celebration. The suite looked exactly as they'd left it the night before, champagne bottle chilling in its silver bucket, rose petals scattered across the marble floor, wedding dress hanging pristinely in the armoire like a white ghost. But Emma's overnight bag was gone. Her jewelry case, the one that contained her grandmother's pearl earrings and the sapphire bracelet he'd specifically suggested she bring, had vanished from the vanity table. Even her phone charger had been removed from the bedside table. The only trace of her presence was a single sheet of hotel stationery, folded precisely in half and placed on her pillow. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for it, some primal instinct already warning him that whatever was written there would change everything. The note was written in Emma's careful script, each letter formed with the precision she'd learned in those expensive private schools. Check your inbox. 3 words. 21 letters. The complete destruction of his carefully orchestrated plan. Daniel's laptop sat closed on the mahogany desk across the room, suddenly looking like a ticking bomb rather than the tool he'd used to research and catalog the Wellington family's assets. He approached it with the reluctance of a man walking to his own execution. The email notification showed 47 unread messages, but only one sender mattered. emma.wellington.daniel@gmail.com. The timestamp read 5:47 a.m., less than 6 hours after their last dance, while he'd been sleeping off the champagne and dreaming of Barcelona beaches. The subject line was devastatingly simple: everything I know. Daniel's finger hovered over the trackpad for several heartbeats before he found the courage to open what he somehow knew would be his professional and personal obituary. The email began without preamble or emotion, just cold, factual presentation of evidence that made his blood turn to ice water. Daniel. Attached you will find screenshots of every email you sent to Lila Martinez during our relationship. Voice recordings of your conversations about my family's financial opportunities. Copies of hotel receipts for nights you claimed to be traveling for work. The prenuptial agreement you drafted before proposing. And the plane tickets to Barcelona dated for today. Tickets purchased in both your name and Lila's. My brother found everything 6 months ago. We've been waiting. Daniel's vision blurred as he scrolled through attachment after attachment. Screenshots of messages he'd thought were private, recorded phone calls where his voice dripped with calculated greed, even photos of handwritten notes where he'd calculated the estimated value of various family heirlooms. But the final attachment was what destroyed him completely. A forwarded message from Lila Martinez, sent to Emma just hours earlier. Emma, I can't let this happen anymore. He told me you were just a means to an end, that once he had access to your trust fund, we would disappear together. I was weak and lonely and believed his lies about loving me. He played us both and I can't live with myself if I don't tell you the truth. I'm sorry for everything. Lila. Daniel stared at the screen, watching his future evaporate in real time. His phone buzzed with incoming notifications, text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up as the reality of his situation began to cascade through his carefully constructed network. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands, scrolling through message after message of cancellations and reversals that felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. His travel agent. Mr. Harrison, your flights to Barcelona have been cancelled at the request of your credit card company. Please contact us immediately. His bank. Account number 4472 has been temporarily frozen pending investigation of suspicious activity. Please visit our fraud department immediately. The hotel concierge. Sir, we've been instructed to hold all charges to your account pending resolution of a legal matter. Your corporate rate has been revoked. Even his attorney had sent a terse message. Daniel, I've received some disturbing information about your recent activities. We need to meet immediately. Do not contact Emma Wellington or her family. The walls of the luxury suite seemed to close in around him as the magnitude of his situation became clear. Everything he'd planned, every move he'd calculated, every lie he'd carefully constructed had been anticipated and countered by people he'd underestimated completely. His phone rang, the name Mom Wellington, appearing on the screen like a death sentence. Daniel stared at it for several rings before desperation overcame his fear. Why? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it, raw and broken and nothing like the confident charm he'd wielded so effectively for months. Margaret Wellington's voice came through the speaker like winter wind, cold, cutting, final. There was a long pause, as if she were savoring the moment of his destruction. You toasted to forever last night, she said finally, her words measured and deliberate. But you forgot something important, Daniel. Some toasts end with broken glass. The line went dead, leaving him alone with the silence that felt heavier than any sound he'd ever heard. Minutes later, his laptop chimed with one final message. This one came from an email address he'd never seen before. zachary.wellington.private@gmail.com. The message contained only a single sentence, but it cut deeper than Emma's evidence or Margaret's cold dismissal. You'll remember that empty chair forever. Because it was empty and still more useful than you. Daniel collapsed into the velvet armchair beside the window, staring out at the city skyline that had looked so promising just hours earlier. Somewhere out there, Emma was safe with her family, probably being comforted by the brother whose absence had seemed like such a minor detail the night before. The empty chair. The missing piece that he'd dismissed as unimportant, never realizing it represented the very person who'd been documenting his every move, building the case that would destroy him. As the morning sun climbed higher, Daniel sat in his empty suite, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had actually been his funeral. The champagne had gone flat, the roses were wilting, and the future he'd so carefully planned had crumbled to dust while he slept. The silence stretched endlessly before him, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the steady buzz of his phone, call after call from numbers he didn't recognize, probably reporters or investigators or angry family members who'd just learned the truth. He didn't answer any of them. What was the point? The game was over and he'd lost more completely than he'd ever imagined possible. The empty chair had won. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't really a wedding, Emma appeared at my kitchen door holding nothing but her car keys and a small overnight bag. The morning light caught the hollow spaces beneath her eyes, but there was something different about her posture. Straighter, more deliberate, like she'd shed an invisible weight I hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "Can I come home?" she asked, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in the question. I opened my arms without hesitation, and for the first time in months, my daughter's embrace felt genuine. No performance, no desperate attempt to convince herself she was happy. Just Emma returning to herself. Over the following days, I watched her navigate the quiet spaces of our house with a grace I hadn't seen since before Daniel entered her life. She would sit in the garden with her morning coffee, reading books she'd abandoned during their relationship. She cooked elaborate meals for just the two of us, humming softly while she worked. A habit Daniel had criticized as too distracting. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. It was subtle, like watching a flower unfold in slow motion. She laughed more freely, but the laughter was quieter, more genuine. Her smiles became smaller but somehow more radiant, reaching her eyes in a way they hadn't for months. One evening, about 2 weeks after her return, Emma made dinner. Her grandmother's recipe for cocoa vin, the one that required hours of patient preparation. We ate by candlelight in the dining room, using the good china, sharing comfortable silences between bites. "Thank you," she said suddenly, setting down her wine glass with deliberate care. I waited, knowing she needed space to find her words. "I know you knew," she continued, her eyes meeting mine across the table. "Maybe not everything, but enough. And I know you could have stopped it earlier, but you didn't. You let me have my wedding day even knowing." She trailed off, but her expression held no anger, only a deep, complicated gratitude that didn't require explanation. "You deserve to make your own choice," I replied simply. "Even if that choice was discovering the truth for yourself." We finished dinner without mentioning Daniel's name once, and somehow that silence felt more healing than any conversation could have been. Zach's return happened gradually, like sunrise after a long night. Emma had been home for almost a month when she finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Where is he really?" I know he wasn't traveling for work." We were sitting on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Emma's voice held curiosity rather than accusation, as if she were solving a puzzle rather than confronting a deception. "Why don't you call him and ask?" I suggested gently. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. I could hear it ringing through the speaker, then Zach's familiar voice answering with cautious warmth. "Hey Em. Where are you?" she asked without preamble. "About 15 minutes away," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Been staying at the Marriott downtown. Waiting for you to be ready to see me." The tears came then, not the broken sobs of heartbreak, but the cleansing rain of relief and recognition. Zach arrived 20 minutes later, And Emma launched herself into his arms like she had when they were children and he'd returned from summer camp. "Not far," he said when she asked again where he'd been. "Just quiet." They held each other in the foyer for a long time, and when they finally separated, something in our family constellation had realigned itself. The empty space that Daniel had tried to fill was revealed for what it truly was. Not a void that needed filling but a protective buffer that had kept us safe. The package from Lila arrived on a Thursday morning, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper like a sacred relic, was the engagement ring Daniel had originally purchased for her. The one Zach had found documentation for during his investigation. It was beautiful in a conventional way, a classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught the light predictably. But holding it, I felt only sadness for the woman who'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as my daughter, though in different ways. There was no note, no explanation, just the quiet gesture of a woman returning something that had never truly belonged to her. Emma examined the ring with detached curiosity, like an archaeologist studying an artifact from a civilization she'd never known. "She loved him too," Emma said quietly, turning the ring in the morning light. "Or thought she did." "Yes," I agreed. "You both deserved better." Emma placed the ring back in its box with gentle finality. "What should we do with it?" "Whatever feels right to you." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. One of those new, smaller smiles that held more truth than her old theatrical ones. "I think I'll donate it. Let it become someone else's beginning instead of our ending." The society pages and gossip networks had a field day with the story, though they never learned the full truth. The official narrative was simply that the marriage had been annulled due to irreconcilable differences discovered immediately after the ceremony. But those who'd been at the wedding remembered the empty chair, and gradually, the real story emerged in whispered conversations at country clubs and charity galas. "Remember the missing brother at the Wellington wedding?" I overheard Mrs. Henderson saying at the club's spring luncheon. "Turns out he saved the whole family from disaster." The conversations were always respectful, tinged with admiration rather than scandal. People began to understand that Zach's absence had been strategic, protective, even heroic. When they saw me now, there were subtle nods of acknowledgement, as if they recognized that I'd seen something they'd missed. The baccarat crystal flute that Daniel had toasted with that night found its way to a place of honor in my china cabinet. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most precious things survive intact despite being handled by unworthy hands. These days, I keep that chair by the window in my study, positioned where the afternoon light falls across its empty seat. It's become my favorite piece of furniture not despite its emptiness but because of it. Every morning, I dust it carefully, polish the wood until it gleams, and appreciate the space it occupies without demanding to be filled. Sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I can almost see Zach sitting there during those months of careful watching and patient planning. Other times, I see all the other meaningful absences in my life. My husband's chair at the dinner table, the space where Emma's childhood bedroom used to echo with laughter, the moments when saying nothing meant everything. The chair has taught me that absence isn't always loss. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's the deepest form of love, stepping back so others can learn to stand on their own, creating space for truth to emerge naturally rather than forcing revelations that might cause more harm than healing. Emma visits that chair sometimes, running her fingers along its wooden arms with the same reverence she once reserved for prayer. She understands now what it represents, not abandonment but vigilance. Not distance, but the perfect positioning to catch someone when they're ready to fall into their own wisdom. Zach. He sits in it occasionally when he visits, usually when he's helping me plan some new family protection strategy or reviewing investment portfolios. The chair seems to fit him perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for someone who understood that the most powerful position isn't always center stage. The empty chair has become our family's most treasured heirloom, not because of what it holds but because of what it protects. In its deliberate absence, we found our way back to each other. If this story of a mother's strategic protection had you captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the empty chair's true meaning was finally revealed, showing how absence became the ultimate act of love. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful family stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Amber Nelson, 34 years old. And I'll never forget that Wednesday afternoon when my world shifted. While scrolling through Instagram, I saw my wealthy family's Mediterranean cruise photos juxtaposed with the realization that my neighbor Lillian Campbell was spending her 75th birthday completely alone. Lillian, the woman who'd been more of a mother to me than my own. I abandoned my important meeting and raced across Chicago to her doorstep, never imagining that what I discovered next would unravel decades of family secrets and break open the facade my parents had carefully maintained. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear how one forgotten birthday exposed the truth that would change everything. My story with Lillian began exactly 8 years ago when I moved to Chicago after landing my first serious marketing job. The moving truck had just pulled away, leaving me surrounded by boxes in a neighborhood I barely knew. I was struggling with a particularly heavy bookshelf when I heard a warm voice call out, "You'll throw your back out that way, dear." That was Lillian Campbell, 77, silver-haired, with laugh lines that told stories of a life well lived. She didn't just offer advice. She rolled up her sleeves and helped, despite being more than twice my age. After we got the bookshelf positioned, she insisted I come over for dinner, saying no one should eat takeout on their first night in a new home. Her modest two-bedroom house stood in stark contrast to the sleek high-rise I'd moved from. Walking in felt like entering a time capsule. Furniture that had been lovingly maintained for decades, walls lined with photographs, and the smell of homemade bread that I later learned she baked weekly. That night over pot roast, I learned Lillian had lost her husband Harold 3 years prior after 50 years of marriage. They never had children, a fact she mentioned with a momentary flicker of sadness. Harold always said we had enough love for a dozen kids, she told me, but sometimes life has other plans. What started as a neighborly dinner became a weekly tradition. Every Sunday, I'd find myself at Lillian's table, sharing stories about my week while she offered wisdom wrapped in her characteristic directness. When my boyfriend of 2 years broke up with me via text 6 months after I moved in, it was Lillian's couch I cried on, not my parents who simply suggested I focus on my career instead. Men who can't face you when things get hard aren't worth your tears, Lillian had said, passing me another tissue. But you go ahead and cry them anyway. Sometimes washing your heart clean is necessary. She was right, as she usually was. And when I got passed over for a promotion I'd worked tirelessly for, Lillian didn't offer empty platitudes like my family. Instead, she poured 2 glasses of her late husband's prize scotch. Harold saved this for special occasions, she explained, and learning who doesn't value you properly is very special indeed. We'd spent every holiday together since I moved in. My family always had elaborate plans, skiing in Aspen, cruising the Caribbean, or jetting off to Europe, but they never extended invitations that included me unless I could take substantial time off work. Lillian never made me choose. Whether it was Thanksgiving dinner with her famous cranberry relish or watching fireworks from her small balcony on the 4th of July, she created traditions that made me feel like I belonged. For Christmas 2 years ago, my parents sent an expensive designer purse with a generic card signed by their assistant. Lillian gave me a hand-knitted scarf and a first edition of my favorite childhood book she'd tracked down through a friend who owned a used bookstore. The purse sits in my closet, barely used. I wear Lillian's scarf every winter. When I finally received that long-awaited promotion last year, my parents acknowledged it with a quick congratulatory text. Lillian, though, attended the office party, wearing her best dress and introducing herself proudly to my colleagues as practically family. She beamed with more pride than I'd ever seen from my actual mother. But I'm not blameless in what happened. After that promotion, my workload doubled. 60-hour weeks became my norm. My Sunday dinners with Lillian became bi-weekly, then monthly. Our phone calls shortened. I'd wave hurriedly when I saw her collecting her mail instead of stopping to chat. I told myself it was temporary, that once I established myself in the new role, I'd make more time. But time has a way of slipping through your fingers when you're not paying attention. For years, we'd celebrated our birthdays together. Nothing elaborate, just dinner and cake and genuine conversation. Lillian would insist on baking my favorite chocolate raspberry cake, and I'd always find a special gift that spoke to our connection. For her 74th birthday last year, I'd arranged a small gathering with some of her church friends and neighbors. Her smile that day was luminous, which makes what happened on her 75th all the more unforgivable. In my defense, the date hadn't completely slipped my mind. I'd marked it on my calendar, even ordered a gift online, a cashmere cardigan I knew she'd love but would never buy for herself. What I'd failed to do was recognize the significance of this particular birthday or anticipate how my family's latest escapade would illuminate my own failure in such a painful way. Sometimes the greatest betrayals happen not in moments of malice, but in moments of distraction. And I had been very, very distracted. To understand the full weight of what happened, you need to know about my family. The Nelsons of Lake Forest, Illinois, my parents Timothy and Diane, my older brother Jason, and his wife Megan, are what people politely call old money. Our family home is a 6-bedroom colonial on 2 acres. My father drives a new luxury car every year, and vacations are never domestic. I grew up with every material advantage and emotional disadvantage possible. My childhood closet held designer clothes. My childhood memories hold canceled dance recitals and empty seats at school plays. My parents built financial portfolios while failing to build connections with their children. Nelsons achieve, my father would say whenever I brought home anything less than perfect grades. We don't settle for average. This mindset extended to relationships. When I introduced them to my college boyfriend, a brilliant political science major on scholarship, my mother later asked if I was going through a charity phase. When I mentioned Lillian for the first time, describing our Sunday dinners, my father looked confused. You're spending time with an elderly neighbor? Is this some sort of community service for your resume? I stopped mentioning Lillian after that. My brother Jason followed the Nelson script perfectly. Ivy League education, married the daughter of one of my father's business associates, took his place in the family investment firm, and produced 2 photogenic children who are already enrolled in the right preschool. His wife Megan is cut from the same cloth as my mother, polished, poised, and perpetually planning their next status update. The cruise they were on when everything imploded was a 3-week Mediterranean extravaganza, Barcelona to Athens with every luxury port in between. The planning had consumed family conversations for months, though no one ever directly asked if I wanted to join. They knew I couldn't take that much time away from my new position, and asking would have obligated them to pretend they wanted me there. The morning of Lillian's birthday, my Instagram feed flooded with their updates. My mother in designer sunglasses on the deck of their suite, captioned, "Morning coffee with this view. #blessed." My brother and his wife posed with champagne flutes against a sunset in Santorini. Their children, my niece and nephew, building sandcastles on a private beach in Sicily, attended by what appeared to be a hired helper. Each photo was more elaborate than the last, a carefully curated display of privilege. Comments poured in from their social circle, a virtual chorus of admiration and envy. My father, who rarely posted himself, appeared in a photo raising a glass at the captain's table, tagged with the cruise line's premium package #. These displays weren't unusual. My family documented every vacation this way, not to share joy, but to showcase status. What made this different was the date these photos appeared, and what they inadvertently revealed about our family's priorities. Last Christmas dinner at my parents' house, I'd specifically mentioned Lillian's upcoming 75th birthday. I wasn't subtle. "It's a big milestone," I'd said over dessert. "I was thinking we could do something special. Maybe even as a family." Lillian's mentioned wanting to try that new French restaurant downtown. My mother had sipped her after-dinner coffee and replied, "That's sweet of you, Amber, but we'll be on the cruise then." You understand. I did understand. I understood that a woman who had shown me more genuine care and attention than my own mother wasn't deemed worthy of a schedule adjustment. I understood that my family's Mediterranean photo opportunities took precedence over acknowledging someone who mattered deeply to me. "She's just your neighbor, honey," my mother had added when she saw my expression. "It's not like she's family." That comment stung particularly because Lillian had been more family to me than anyone sharing my DNA. She'd attended my university graduation when my parents had an unavoidable conflict, a golf tournament. She'd held my hand through a health scare 3 years ago, while my mother sent flowers with a card clearly written by her assistant. Lillian remembered how I take my coffee, my favorite books, and calls just to ask about my day without wanting anything in return. The previous Thanksgiving, I'd impulsively invited Lillian to join us at my parents' house. The resulting dinner was excruciating. My family treated her with cool politeness while exchanging glances whenever she spoke. They asked no questions about her life and changed the subject whenever she tried to share stories about me. Afterward, my mother had pulled me aside. "Amber, we understand you're fond of your friend, but holiday dinners are for family. It makes conversations so awkward when we have to watch what we say." What they had to watch was their casual classism and tendency to mock people they considered beneath them. Lillian, with her public school teaching background and modest lifestyle, didn't fit their approved social circle. As I scrolled through their cruise photos that fateful morning, a particular image stopped my thumb mid-swipe. My mother and father posed with another couple, glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating life's special moments with dear friends." They could celebrate special moments with virtual strangers on a cruise ship, but couldn't acknowledge Lillian's 75th birthday. The hypocrisy burned through me like acid. I kept scrolling, my resentment building with each glossy image. My brother's wife Megan had posted a philosophical caption beneath a photo of herself gazing at the ocean. "Life is about cherishing the people who matter most." The irony would have been comical if it hadn't been so infuriating. These posts continued all morning, a digital parade of conspicuous consumption and hollow platitudes about what truly matters in life. All while someone who genuinely mattered sat alone on a day that should have been celebrated. The final straw was my father's rare personal post, a family photo on the ship's grand staircase with the caption, "The Nelson Family Legacy." Nothing more important than family traditions. In that moment, something snapped inside me. Their carefully constructed facade suddenly looked not just shallow but cruel. I put down my phone and looked at my calendar, where Lillian's birthday sat marked with a little heart emoji. And I realized with horror that it wasn't just my family who had failed her. I had too. That Wednesday had begun like any other workday. I'd arrived at the office by 7:30, armed with my third coffee of the morning, and a to-do list that would take 12 hours to complete. My team was finalizing a pitch for our biggest potential client of the year, and as the newly promoted marketing director, the pressure sat squarely on my shoulders. During my lunch break, which consisted of a sad desk salad eaten while reviewing presentation slides, I mindlessly scrolled through social media. That's when my family's cruise photos began dominating my feed. Between approving graphics and answering emails, I flicked through images of sun-drenched decks and azure waters. Then my phone calendar alert chimed softly. Lillian's 75th birthday. The realization hit me with physical force. I actually gasped aloud, causing my assistant to look up with concern. How had I let this slip? I'd ordered the cardigan weeks ago, which I now remembered with a fresh wave of shame, still sat in its delivery box on my hallway table, but I'd made no actual plans. No dinner reservation, no cake order, no card. Nothing to mark this significant milestone for a woman who never forgot a single important day in my life. I immediately tried calling Lillian, but there was no answer. This wasn't unusual. She often left her phone in another room, but today it sent a spike of anxiety through me. I texted, "Happy birthday, Lillian. Are you around for dinner tonight?" The message showed as delivered but not read. The next hour passed in a blur of distraction. I couldn't focus on the presentation, my mind continuously drifting to Lillian. Was she sitting alone in her house right now? Had anyone remembered? Had she made her own birthday cake, as she sometimes joked about doing? At 2:30, we had our final pre-pitch meeting scheduled with the entire team and 2 company vice presidents. As everyone filed into the conference room, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable to me just hours before. "Jennifer," I said to my assistant, I have a personal emergency. I need to reschedule this meeting. Her eyes widened. The Westfield pitch meeting? But everyone's already here and the VPs. I know. I'll deal with the fallout tomorrow. This can't wait. I grabbed my purse, leaving my laptop behind, and headed for the elevator. My phone immediately began buzzing with messages from confused team members, but I silenced it as I reached the parking garage. The drive from downtown Chicago to our neighborhood normally took 45 minutes in afternoon traffic. I made it in 30, running 2 yellow lights and taking shortcuts through residential streets I normally avoided. All the while, memories of previous birthdays with Lillian played through my mind like a slideshow of my own failure. Her 72nd birthday, when we'd gone to the Art Institute and spent hours admiring the Impressionists. She'd stood before Monet's water lilies and told me how she and Harold had once visited Giverny on their 30th anniversary. Her 73rd, when I'd arranged for a former student of hers, now a concert pianist, to give her a private performance in his home studio. Last year, her 74th, with a small gathering of friends and the photo album I'd made chronicling our friendship. And now her 75th, a milestone birthday, and I'd been too wrapped up in my career and my resentment toward my family to properly acknowledge it. As I turned onto our street, my stomach tightened seeing Lillian's small brick house. No cars parked outside, no signs of celebration. The curtains were drawn, which was unusual for daytime. For a horrible moment, I imagined finding her ill, or worse, punishment for my neglect. I parked haphazardly and rushed to her door, pressing the doorbell repeatedly. After what felt like an eternity, I heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Lillian, healthy but clearly surprised to see me. She wore a simple blue blouse and slacks, not her usual house clothes, but nothing particularly festive either. "Amber, what are you doing here in the middle of a workday? Is everything all right?" The normality of her greeting made everything worse. She wasn't expecting anything from me today. She'd given up on anyone remembering. "It's your birthday," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Your 75th birthday." Something flickered across her face, pleasure at my remembrance quickly masked by practiced nonchalance.
"Oh, that."
"Yes, I suppose it is." She smiled and stepped back to invite me in. "Did you rush over here just for that?" "You shouldn't have, dear. I know how busy you are." I followed her inside, noticing immediately that there were no cards on display, no flowers, no evidence that anyone had acknowledged this day. The house was immaculately clean, as always, but had the stillness of a space where nothing special was happening. In the kitchen, I spotted a single store-bought cupcake on a plate at her kitchen table. A solitary candle stuck out from the center, unlit. Beside it lay an open book and reading glasses. She'd been planning to mark her 75th year on Earth with a cupcake and a novel alone. When she saw me notice it, Lillian quickly moved to the refrigerator. "Can I get you something to drink?" I wasn't expecting company, but I have iced tea. "Lillian," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "were you going to celebrate your birthday all alone?" She busied herself with glasses, her back to me. "It's just another day, Amber. At my age, they come and go rather quickly." She turned, composing her features into a cheerful expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, you remembered. That's a lovely gift right there." That's when I noticed she was wearing earrings I'd never seen before, small pearl studs that looked antique. She dressed nicely and put on jewelry for a birthday she was spending alone. "Did anyone else call?" "Send cards?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My bridge club sent a lovely email. And the church bulletin mentioned it last Sunday. She set a glass of iced tea in front of me with determined brightness. "Now tell me why you're really here, in the middle of a workday. You never leave that office before 7. It was her attempt to deflect, to minimize her disappointment and save me from guilt. That selfless act, putting my feelings above her own, even on her birthday, broke something inside me. "I'm here because it's your 75th birthday, and I almost forgot," I admitted, tears threatening. I've been so wrapped up in work and my own problems that I nearly let today pass without celebration, and I'm so sorry, Lillian. You deserve so much better. She reached across the table and patted my hand.
Now.
You're here now, and that's what matters. No, I said firmly, wiping my eyes. What matters is that you've never forgotten a single important day in my life, and somehow I let the most important people in my life, including me, forget yours. I looked at the sad little cupcake, at the woman who'd been more family to me than my actual relatives, and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Get your purse, I said, standing up. We're not celebrating your 75th with a supermarket cupcake. This birthday isn't over yet, it's just getting started. Amber, really, you don't need to make a fuss, Lillian protested as I practically pulled her toward the door. You have work, and I'm perfectly content with my book, and your 75th birthday happens once. I interrupted, already pulling out my phone. Work will still be there tomorrow. In my car, I made a flurry of calls while Lillian sat beside me, alternating between amusement and embarrassment at my determination. First, I called Jennifer, my assistant, and after apologizing for my abrupt departure, asked her to move heaven and earth for me. I need reservations at Maison Laurent for tonight. Yes, I know they're booked months in advance. Offer whatever it takes. I did that emergency rebranding for the owner's son's startup last year. And Jennifer? Thank you. Next came calls to Lillian's church friend Grace, who had a key to Lillian's house and contact information for her social circle. Within 15 minutes, Grace had agreed to make some discreet calls and arrange for several of Lillian's closest friends to meet us for dinner. Amber, where are we going? Lillian asked as I drove toward Michigan Avenue. First stop, Saks, I announced. Every birthday girl needs a new outfit. Her eyes widened. Saks Fifth Avenue? I haven't shopped there in 30 years. It's much too expensive and I don't need. This isn't about need, I said gently. It's about celebrating you properly. The personal shopper I'd hastily arranged met us at the entrance. For the next hour, Lillian tried on elegant dresses while I insisted she choose whatever made her feel beautiful. She finally settled on a deep burgundy dress with three-quarter sleeves that complemented her silver hair perfectly. Harold always loved me in red, she said softly, examining her reflection. For a moment, I saw not the 75-year-old woman before me, but glimpses of the younger Lillian, the woman who had danced with her husband, taught generations of students, and built a life filled with purpose. After adding shoes and a cashmere wrap, and secretly purchasing several other items to be delivered later, we headed to the Elizabeth Arden salon where, thanks to another work connection, they squeezed Lillian in for a styling appointment. I haven't had my hair professionally done since my 50th wedding anniversary, she confessed as the stylist worked. I sat nearby, continuing to make arrangements on my phone while watching Lillian's transformation. Not just physical, though the elegant updo certainly took years off her appearance, but emotional. With each passing hour, she straightened her posture, smiled more freely, and let herself be celebrated. By 6:30, we arrived at Maison Laurent, arguably the best French restaurant in Chicago and notoriously impossible to book without months of advanced planning. The maitre d' greeted us by name and led us to the best table in the house, a corner spot with views of both the twinkling city lights and the restaurant's elegant interior. Lillian clutched my arm. Amber, how did you manage this? This place is perfect for your birthday. I finished for her. And we're just getting started. The real surprise came moments later when Grace arrived, followed by 5 other people Lillian had known for decades, her former teaching colleague Robert and his wife Susan, her neighbor of 30 years Margaret, her bridge partner William, and her niece Cynthia, who had flown in from Milwaukee on 2 hours' notice after my desperate call. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth as they approached the table. What on earth? Cynthia? You were in Wisconsin this morning. Her niece embraced her tightly. I wouldn't miss your 75th for anything, Aunt Lil. Though I did need Amber's wake-up call to remind me how important today is. The 7 of us settled around the table as the chef himself appeared to announce he'd prepared a special tasting menu in honor of the occasion. Champagne flowed, Stories were shared, and Lillian glowed with happiness at the center of it all. During the second course, a delicate scallop dish that Lillian proclaimed reminded her of her honeymoon in Marseille, she leaned toward me. "How did you pull this together in just a few hours?" I smiled. Let's just say I'm putting my professional skills to personal use for once. The truth was more complicated. Every favor I'd called in, every string I'd pulled represented connections I'd built while neglecting my relationship with Lillian. My career success had come at a cost, and seeing her happiness now made me question the bargain I'd struck. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to check my phone, which had been buzzing persistently. 27 missed calls and messages, mostly work-related, but 3 from my mother, unusual given that she rarely called when on vacation. I ignored them all and returned to the table just as the lights dimmed. The restaurant staff emerged with a stunning 3-tiered cake adorned with candles, while the pianist played "Happy Birthday." The entire restaurant joined in singing, and Lillian, overcome with emotion, gripped my hand tightly. "Make a wish," I whispered as she prepared to blow out the candles. After dessert and coffee, Lillian's friends presented her with hastily arranged but heartfelt gifts: books, a beautiful scarf, a framed photo of her late husband that Robert had digitally restored. My gift, the forgotten cashmere cardigan, would have to wait until we returned home. As the evening wound down, I stepped away again to take photos of the group, making sure to capture Lillian's radiant smile. Without thinking, I posted several to my Instagram with a caption, "Celebrating the most amazing woman on her 75th birthday. She's taught me what family really means." It was a pointed message aimed directly at my relatives and their cruise ship platitudes. I tagged the restaurant and added a few more photos of Lillian with her cake, surrounded by people who had dropped everything to be with her on this special day. As we prepared to leave, the restaurant manager approached with a small package. "A little something to remember the evening," he said, presenting Lillian with a signed menu and a box of house-made chocolates. In the car heading home, Lillian was uncharacteristically quiet. When I glanced over, I saw tears slipping down her cheeks. "Lillian? What's wrong? Wasn't it a good celebration?" She patted my hand on the steering wheel. "It was perfect, dear. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am. At my age, many people are forgotten. Tonight reminded me that I'm not." Her words cut straight to my heart. You could never be forgotten. Not by people who truly know what matters. We arrived back at her house just after 11. I helped her inside with her packages and gifts, making sure she was settled. "Thank you for the most wonderful birthday," she said at the door. "Though I still think you shouldn't have left work like that." I hugged her tightly. "Some things are more important than work. I'm just sorry it took me so long to remember that." Driving the short distance to my own house, I checked my phone again. The work messages I expected, but my mother had now called 5 times. Unusual enough that I felt a twinge of concern. I called her back once I was inside. Finally, she answered immediately. "Would you care to explain what you're doing? Your father is furious." "Hello to you too, Mom. I'm fine. Thanks for asking." "Don't be smart, Amber. I'm talking about those photos you posted. Making a spectacle with your neighbor and that passive-aggressive caption. What were you thinking?" I sank onto my couch, exhausted but still riding the emotional high of the evening. I was thinking that someone I care about deserved to be celebrated on her 75th birthday. Something our family apparently couldn't be bothered to remember. "She's not family," my mother said sharply. "And you've made us look terrible. Everyone's commenting about how wonderful you are while we're away on our cruise." "Maybe because it is terrible," I replied, my voice rising. "Lillian has been more present in my life than any of you for years. She's never forgotten my birthday or promotion, or shown up when I was sick. Can you say the same?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then my mother's voice, unusually hesitant. "You've never mentioned this woman was so important to you." "I have. Multiple times. You just never listened." I took a deep breath. "Look, I'm tired. It's been a long day. Enjoy your cruise. We can talk when you get back." "This conversation isn't over," she warned. Your father wants to speak with you tomorrow. After hanging up, I scrolled through the comments on my Instagram post. Friends and colleagues expressing delight at the celebration, asking about Lillian, commenting on how happy she looked. No one had ever responded that way to posts about my family. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Lillian. Thank you for making an old woman feel like a queen today. You are the daughter of my heart. I fell asleep with those words echoing in my mind, unaware that my impulsive Instagram post had set in motion revelations that would shake my family to its core. The following morning brought consequences I should have anticipated. My phone rang at 6 a.m., my father calling directly from the cruise ship, $13 per minute international rates be damned. What exactly are you trying to prove with this stunt, Amber? His voice carried the clipped tone he reserved for business adversaries and disappointing children. Your mother is upset, and frankly, so am I. I sat up in bed, sleep evaporating instantly. Good morning to you too, Dad. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was celebrating someone important to me. By publicly shaming your family? That caption wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be, I admitted, surprising myself with my boldness. Lillian turned 75 yesterday. It's a milestone birthday for someone who's been there for every important moment in my life. None of you even sent a text. We didn't know it was so important, he said dismissively. You can't expect us to track your neighbors' birthdays while we're traveling. I mentioned it at Christmas dinner. Specifically, Mom changed the subject to talk about the cruise. His sigh carried across the ocean. Amber, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. This woman is your neighbor, not your responsibility. We're your family. That word, family, struck a nerve. Are you? Because Lillian checks on me when I'm sick. She remembers how I take my coffee and what books I'm reading. She's never once made me feel like my career choices are disappointing or that I'm somehow less valuable than Jason. That's completely unfair, he snapped. We've supported you financially through. Money isn't support, Dad. Presence is. Care is. Actually knowing me is. A notification popped up on my phone, a text from my brother Jason. What the hell, Amber? Mom's in tears and Dad's on the warpath. Over some old lady's birthday? Call me. I need to go, I told my father. I have an early meeting. We're not finished discussing this, he warned. Actually, we are for now. Enjoy your cruise. I hung up, an unprecedented act of defiance that left me shaking slightly. Minutes later, Jason called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my sister-in-law Megan texted. Way to ruin everyone's vacation. Real mature. By the time I arrived at work, my family's displeasure had manifested in a group chat specifically created to address what they were now calling my public tantrum. I silenced it and focused on damage control at the office. To my surprise, the fallout from abandoning yesterday's meeting wasn't as severe as expected. My boss, while concerned about my abrupt departure, seemed more interested in the successful resolution. Family emergency? He asked when I stopped by his office to apologize. Yes, I answered, realizing it wasn't a lie. Someone very important to me needed me. He nodded. The team pulled together, and the pitch went well. Just don't make a habit of it. By lunchtime, my phone had accumulated 37 messages from my family. I ignored them all and instead called Lillian to check on her. I'm still floating on air, she told me. Cynthia stayed over, and we're having lunch. Would you like to join us? I can't today, but I'll stop by this evening, I promised. After work, I picked up dinner and headed to Lillian's house. Cynthia opened the door, greeting me with a warm hug. Thank you for yesterday, she said quietly. I should have remembered on my own. Lillian was arranging her birthday flowers in the living room, still wearing the new cashmere cardigan I'd finally given her. We ate together, and I was struck by the easy conversation, the genuine interest in each other's lives. So different from the performance-based interactions with my biological family. As we cleared the dishes, Lillian mentioned casually, "Your mother called me today." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. She what? Called to wish me happy birthday. Rather late, of course, but she said she'd only just realized the date's significance. The thought of my mother reaching out to Lillian sent a chill through me. What else did she say? She asked how long we've been friends. Seemed quite interested in our relationship. Lillian's expression grew thoughtful. She had a strange tone when I mentioned knowing your grandmother. You knew my grandmother? This was news to me. Lillian looked surprised. Of course. Ellen and I taught at the same school for years before she married your grandfather. We remained friends until she passed. This connection had never been mentioned by my family. But when I introduced you to my parents that Thanksgiving, they acted like they'd never heard of you. Something shifted in Lillian's expression. Perhaps they hadn't. Ellen and I were close, but your grandfather never approved of the friendship. He was very conscious of social standing. That sounds familiar, I muttered. After dinner, while Cynthia watched television, Lillian invited me to help sort through some of her birthday cards. In her bedroom, she unexpectedly pulled a dusty photo album from her closet. I've been meaning to show you these for years, she said, opening to black and white photos of two young women in 1960s clothing. Your grandmother and me, when we were starting out as teachers. I stared at the unfamiliar young woman who was apparently my grandmother, arm in arm with a youthful Lillian. More photos followed, holidays, teaching events, and eventually my grandmother's wedding. You were at her wedding? Lillian nodded. I was a bridesmaid, despite your grandfather's objections. As we turned pages, I noticed fewer photos as the years progressed until they stopped entirely in the late 1970s. The final photo showed Lillian with my grandmother holding an infant. Is that my father?
No, dear.
That's your Uncle Charles. He passed before you were born. I knew vaguely of an uncle who died young, but my family never discussed him. Behind this photo was an envelope that slipped out when Lillian turned the page. Oh, she said softly, picking it up. I'd forgotten about these. Inside were letters, dozens of them, in my grandmother's handwriting. Lillian hesitated before handing me one dated 1982. Dearest Lillian, I cannot thank you enough for what you've done for us. Timothy refuses to acknowledge where the money came from, but without your and Harold's generosity, we would have lost everything. Bernard's investment disaster has nearly ruined us, but your loan has saved our home and the children's education funds. Bernard forbids me from seeing you, says it's inappropriate, now that we're in your debt. But know that not a day passes that I don't think of you. When this financial mess is sorted, I promise we'll repay every cent with eternal gratitude and love. Ellen. I looked up at Lillian, stunned. You loaned my grandparents money? Harold did, primarily. Your grandfather's investment firm collapsed, and they were facing bankruptcy. Harold had just sold his manufacturing business and had the capital. It was a substantial amount, nearly $200,000. In today's money, that would be close to $500,000. Did they ever repay you? Lillian's hesitation told me everything. Your grandfather passed away before the loan was fully repaid. We never pressed your grandmother about it. So my family's financial recovery, maybe even the foundation of their current wealth, was partly due to Harold's loan, yes. She took back the letter gently. Your grandmother was my dearest friend. We would have done anything for her. But my family has acted like they don't even know you. They've treated you like you're beneath them. Lillian shrugged. Pride is a powerful force, Amber. Some people can't bear to acknowledge when they've needed help. My mind raced, connecting dots. My grandfather's investment firm had rebounded in the mid-1980s, becoming the foundation of my family's current wealth. The timing aligned perfectly with Lillian's loan. Do my parents know about this? Your father must. He was in college when it happened. As for your mother and brother. She trailed off. Perhaps not the details. I was still processing this revelation when my phone rang. My mother again for the 6th time that day. This time, I answered and immediately put it on speaker so Lillian could hear. Amber, we need to talk about your relationship with this woman. My mother began without preamble. Her name is Lillian, Mom. And I've just learned something interesting about her connection to our family. A pause. What are you talking about? Lillian and Harold's loan to Grandpa Bernard in 1982. The money that saved his business and probably laid the groundwork for our family's current lifestyle. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice tight. "Who told you about that?" "Lillian has letters from Grandma Ellen." "Did Dad ever tell you about it?" "It's complicated, Amber." That was a difficult time for the family. Difficult enough to pretend not to know the woman who helped save you from financial ruin? To treat her like she's not good enough for our precious family circle? "You don't understand the full picture," my mother said defensively. "Your father had reasons. I understand enough. And I think we need to have a family meeting when you return, with Lillian present." "That's completely inappropriate. This is private family business." "Lillian is family to me," I said firmly. "And, apparently, our family owes her a lot more than we've acknowledged." I ended the call before she could respond. Lillian was watching me with concerned eyes. "I didn't show you those letters to cause trouble, Amber. You showed me the truth. Something my family has been hiding for decades." I took her hands in mine, and it's time they faced it. That night, I received a video call request from my entire family, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law, all gathered in their cruise ship suite with grim expressions. I accepted the call from my living room, having prepared myself for battle. "Amber," my father began gravely, "your mother tells me you've been making some disturbing accusations." "Not accusations, Dad. I've discovered facts about our family's history with Lillian Campbell. Facts you've deliberately hidden." His expression hardened. "The financial arrangements between your grandfather and the Campbells were complicated and private. So complicated that you pretended not to know Lillian when I introduced her? So private that you've treated her with barely concealed disdain while sitting on your yacht purchased with money that might not exist without her and her husband's generosity." "You're oversimplifying a complex situation," he insisted. "Business dealings from 40 years ago have nothing to do with, they have everything to do with how this family operates," I interrupted. "With the hypocrisy of preaching about family values while ignoring debts, both financial and moral." My brother Jason leaned forward. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here, Amber? Some kind of family confession?" "I want acknowledgement of the truth. I want an apology to Lillian. And I want this family to recognize that our precious legacy was built partly on the kindness of people you now consider beneath you." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We've never considered the Campbells beneath us. That's unfair." "Really?" "Because when I brought Lillian to Thanksgiving, you treated her like an intruder. When I mentioned her 75th birthday, you couldn't be bothered to even send a card." No one spoke for several moments. Then my father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss this when we return next week. A family dinner, to clear the air. With Lillian present," I insisted. My father's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "If that's what it takes to put this unpleasantness behind us." "And one more thing," I added, bolstered by their concession. "There's something else Lillian mentioned today, about her estranged daughter possibly having connections to our family business. I want to know what that's about, too." The shocked expressions on my parents' faces told me Lillian's offhand comment had hit a nerve. My mother actually gasped. "How does she know about Catherine?" my father demanded. "She doesn't really. She just mentioned having an estranged daughter and some connection to the family business. But clearly, you know exactly who she's talking about." My father's face had paled. "We'll discuss this when we return. All of it. Until then, I expect discretion." After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence, wondering what other secrets were about to come to light and how they would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The week between that confrontational video call and my family's return felt interminable. I visited Lillian daily, partially to ensure she was prepared for the upcoming family dinner, but mostly because our conversations had taken on new significance. Each casual mention of the past now carried potential revelations. "Tell me about your daughter," I asked during one of these visits, trying to sound casual while watering Lillian's plants. She stilled, her hands pausing over the scarf she was knitting. "Catherine?" Why the sudden interest? You mentioned her being connected to my family somehow. I'm just curious. Lillian sighed, setting aside her knitting. Catherine and I haven't spoken in nearly 20 years. She was always strong-willed, determined to make her own way. After Harold died, she changed, became harder, more focused on financial success above all else. What happened between you? She married a man I didn't approve of, not because of his background or status, but because of his character. Carson Reynolds was charming but ruthless in business. Eventually, Catherine became just like him. The name struck me as vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. And the connection to my family? Lillian's expression grew cautious. Carson's investment firm did business with your family's company. Beyond that, I don't know details. Catherine stopped sharing her life with me once she entered that world. I nodded, filing away the information for later research. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I searched my family's company records. As a Nelson, I had theoretical access to the investment firm's archives, though I'd never shown interest in the family business. The online portal required several password attempts before I gained access. Once inside, I searched for Reynolds and found what I was looking for. Carson Reynolds had been a major client from 1998 until his death in 2006. His wife, Catherine Reynolds, née Campbell, had then merged her late husband's firm with Nelson Investments, becoming a significant shareholder and board member. The discovery left me breathless. Lillian's estranged daughter wasn't just connected to my family business, she was practically part of it. Catherine Campbell Reynolds sat on the board of directors, attended the holiday parties I'd always avoided, and likely knew my parents well. And no one had ever mentioned this connection. When my parents' cruise ship docked, they didn't immediately return to Chicago. Instead, they extended their trip with an unexpected visit to New York, delaying our confrontation by another week. My father cited urgent business matters, but the timing seemed suspiciously convenient. During this extension, I received a curt email from my father. We'll discuss everything Sunday. 7 p.m. The house. Lillian is welcome. Please be discreet until then. The day before the dinner, I visited Lillian to ensure she felt prepared. She seemed remarkably calm about the whole affair. At my age, dear, family drama loses some of its sting, she explained, selecting a modest navy dress for the occasion. I've lived through worse than an uncomfortable dinner. They may try to minimize what happened with the loan, I warned, or make excuses for their behavior. She patted my hand. I'm not looking for apologies or recognition, Amber. I helped Ellen because I loved her, not to create a debt. If anything, I'm attending this dinner for you. For me, because you deserve answers. And perhaps a better understanding of your family. Her selflessness only reinforced my determination to ensure she received the acknowledgement she deserved. Sunday evening arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering over Lake Forest. I picked up Lillian at 6, noticing she'd brought a large manila envelope. When I asked about it, she simply said, "Insurance." My parents' colonial mansion looked exactly as it always had, imposing, immaculate, and emotionally cold. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I spotted not only my parents' and brother's cars, but an unfamiliar luxury sedan. "They've invited someone else," I muttered, helping Lillian from the car. The front door opened before we reached it. My mother stood there in a perfectly tailored St. John's suit, her expression a practiced mask of hospitality. "Amber, Ms. Campbell, please come in." The formality in her voice was telling. The foyer echoed with uncomfortable silence as I helped Lillian with her coat. My father appeared from his study, drink in hand, looking grave. "We're in the living room," he announced without greeting. "Everyone's waiting." By everyone, he meant not just my brother Jason and his wife Megan, but also a striking woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed in charcoal gray, with Lillian's eyes and my father's rigid posture. Lillian froze when she saw her. "Catherine." The woman nodded curtly. "Mother." The tension in the room crystallized into something almost visible. Catherine Reynolds, Lillian's estranged daughter and apparently my family's business associate, looked simultaneously like and unlike her mother. They shared the same fine bone structure and intelligent eyes, but where Lillian's face showed warmth and compassion, Catherine's displayed only carefully controlled calculation. "Please, let's sit," my mother suggested, gesturing to the arranged seating that deliberately placed Lillian and me opposite everyone else, a visual representation of sides being taken. Once we were seated, my father took control, as he always did in difficult situations. "Amber has raised some concerns about family history and connections that we feel should be addressed directly," he began, sounding like he was opening a board meeting. "We've asked Catherine to join us as her perspective is relevant." "Relevant to what?" I challenged. "The fact that you've hidden your connection to Lillian for years? Or the fact that our family fortune may partially exist thanks to her and her husband's generosity?" My father's jaw tightened. "That's a simplistic interpretation of complex financial matters." "Then explain the complexity," I insisted. He exchanged glances with Catherine, who gave a slight nod. "In 1982, Nelson Investments faced a significant crisis," he began reluctantly. "My father, your grandfather, had made several high-risk investments that failed catastrophically. We were on the verge of losing everything. And Lillian and Harold stepped in," I prompted when he paused. "Yes," he admitted. "Through their connection to my mother, they offered a substantial loan. At the time, it seemed our only option." "And was it repaid in full?" I asked, already knowing the answer from Lillian's reaction. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Not entirely. After my father passed in 1987, certain arrangements were made." "What arrangements?" I pressed. Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice cool and professional. "My father proposed a solution. The remaining debt would be converted to equity in Nelson Investments. A small percentage, but significant." I turned to Lillian, confused. "You own part of Nelson Investments?" She shook her head. "Harold and I declined that offer. We didn't want ownership. We wanted Ellen to be secure after Bernard passed. But the documents were drawn up," Catherine continued. "And after my father and I entered the financial world, we discovered these papers during due diligence for a potential partnership with Nelson Investments. The pieces finally clicked together. So when your husband died, I used those documents as leverage to secure my position within the company," Catherine finished, unapologetic. "Business is business." My brother Jason, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, leaned forward. "What Catherine isn't saying is that her position on our board has been instrumental to our expansion over the past decade. The arrangement has benefited everyone." "Everyone except Lillian," I pointed out, "who's been treated like a stranger despite being essentially an angel investor in our family business." My mother cleared her throat delicately. "There were social complications. Your grandfather was very concerned with appearances. Having it known that a schoolteacher and small business owner had rescued the Nelson fortune would have been difficult for him. So instead, you pretended not to know her? Even after Grandpa died? Even when I specifically brought her into your lives?" My father spread his hands. "By then, patterns were established. And with Catherine's position in the company being what it is, you were afraid I'd discover the truth. I realized that your precious family legacy was built on money you borrowed and never fully repaid." "That's unfair," my mother protested. "Your father has worked tirelessly to build the business into what it is today, with capital he might never have had without the Campbells," I countered. Lillian, who had been silently observing this exchange, finally spoke. "I didn't come here to cast blame or claim credit, Timothy. I came because Amber deserves to understand her family's history." My father's expression softened slightly at her reasonable tone. "What exactly do you want from us, Lillian?" "Nothing for myself. But I would like you to be honest with Amber. She values truth and authentic relationships, qualities I've always admired in her." Catherine made a small, dismissive sound. "How convenient to claim you want nothing while positioning yourself as the moral authority." Lillian turned to her daughter, sadness etching her features. "I've never claimed moral authority, Catherine. I've made many mistakes, especially with you." "This isn't about our relationship," Catherine said sharply. Isn't it? Lillian reached for the manila envelope she'd brought. Everything is connected. The loan to the Nelsons. Your estrangement from me. The person you've become. She opened the envelope and removed several documents, sliding them toward the center of the coffee table. I recognized some as the letters from my grandmother, but others were unfamiliar: financial statements, legal documents, and old photographs. What are these? My father asked, reaching for them cautiously. Evidence, Lillian said simply. Of relationships, of debts, both financial and moral, and of choices made over decades. As my father examined the papers, his face paled. One document in particular seemed to disturb him. A yellowed letter with my grandfather's distinctive signature at the bottom. Where did you get this? He demanded. Harold kept everything, Lillian explained. He believed in maintaining records, especially of promises made. My mother peered over my father's shoulder, gasping softly at whatever she saw. Timothy, is that? Yes, he confirmed grimly. Father's written acknowledgement that the business would have failed without the Campbell loan, and his commitment that the Nelsons would always acknowledge this debt of gratitude. A commitment obviously not honored, I noted. Catherine had gone rigid, staring at another document in the pile, what appeared to be a handwritten letter. She picked it up with slightly trembling hands. This is from Carson, she said, addressing Lillian.
To you.
Lillian nodded. Written 6 months before he died. He wanted to reconcile our families. I never saw this, Catherine whispered, scanning the contents. He sent it without telling you. We spoke by phone afterward. He was changing, Catherine, recognizing that his pursuit of wealth and status had cost him something precious. Catherine's carefully composed expression cracked, showing a glimpse of genuine emotion for the first time. He never said anything to me. He was going to. The accident happened before he could. The room fell silent as Catherine continued reading, the only sound the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. When she finished, she carefully refolded the letter, her movements precise despite her evident emotion. Why show this now? She asked Lillian. Because secrets have power only in darkness, Lillian replied gently. And because it's time for truth, for Amber's sake, for yours, for all of us. My father had been reviewing the financial documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. These show that the original loan was significantly larger than I was told. And that my father, he stopped, seeming unable to continue. That your father deliberately misrepresented the repayment terms to his own family, Lillian completed for him.
Yes.
Ellen knew, which is why she maintained our friendship in secret even after Bernard forbade it. My mother's perfect composure had completely crumbled. All these years, the way we've treated you, and you knew everything. Not everything, Lillian corrected, but enough. Enough to understand that pride can be a prison. Bernard was imprisoned by his, Catherine by hers, perhaps you by yours. She turned to me with a sad smile. That's why I've always admired your freedom, Amber. Your willingness to value people for who they are, not what they represent. Jason, who had been silently processing these revelations, finally spoke. If these documents are authentic, they change the official history of Nelson Investments. The narrative Dad has always told us about Grandpa's business genius saving the company was partially a fiction, my father admitted heavily. Yes. So our family legacy was built on a foundation provided by the Campbells, my father completed. And sustained by your sister's relationship with Lillian, which allowed us to keep pretending otherwise. The truth hung in the air between us, decades of pretense stripped away in a single evening. Catherine still held her late husband's letter, her knuckles white with tension. Does this change anything? She finally asked, looking directly at Lillian for the first time. Between us? Lillian considered the question carefully. That depends on what you want to change, Catherine. I've never stopped loving you, despite our differences. Something vulnerable flickered across Catherine's face, a glimpse of the daughter beneath the businesswoman's armor. 20 years is a long time. Yes, Lillian agreed. Too long. My father cleared his throat, visibly struggling to regain his composure.
Well,
This has been illuminating. He turned to Lillian with obvious difficulty. It appears we owe you far more than an apology for missing your birthday. You owe her acknowledgement, I insisted,
of who she is to this family.
of what she and Harold did. Yes, he conceded, surprising me. We do. He straightened, some of his natural authority returning. And we'll need to discuss how to properly recognize the Campbell contribution to Nelson Investments history. That's hardly necessary, Lillian began, but I interrupted. Actually, it is necessary. Not for your sake, Lillian, but for theirs. For the truth. As the storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke outside, rain lashing against the windows, our family began the painful process of reconstructing its history, not as my grandfather had mythologized it, but as it actually happened, saved by the generosity of a schoolteacher and her husband, sustained by secrecy and pride, and finally exposed by a forgotten birthday and a granddaughter who refused to accept the status quo. By the time we left that night, nothing had been fully resolved, but everything had been irreversibly changed. Catherine walked us to the door, hanging back to speak privately with Lillian while I waited by the car. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the tentative embrace they shared before parting spoke volumes. On the drive home, Lillian was quiet, lost in thought. Are you okay? I finally asked. She nodded, gazing out at the rain-slicked streets. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals, Amber. But it always eventually heals. As I pulled up to her house, she turned to me with tear-bright eyes. Thank you for forcing this reckoning. Not many would have the courage. I learned courage from you, I told her honestly, and what family should really mean. She squeezed my hand before getting out of the car. Family isn't always who we're born to. Sometimes it's who we choose. And who chooses us back, every day, through actions rather than just blood. As I watched her walk to her door, I realized that in trying to right a wrong done to her, I had discovered something far more valuable. The truth about my family, yes, but more importantly, the truth about what family really means. A year has passed since that stormy night when decades of family secrets were finally exposed. Lillian's 75th birthday, which began with a solitary cupcake and ended with revelations that shook my family to its core, became a turning point for all of us. The changes didn't happen overnight. For weeks following our confrontation, my father retreated into his study, poring over the documents Lillian had provided, reconstructing the actual history of Nelson Investments. My mother vacillated between defensive justification and genuine remorse, struggling to reconcile her carefully constructed social identity with the uncomfortable truths now laid bare. Jason surprised me most. 3 days after the dinner, he appeared at my apartment unannounced. I've been thinking, he said without preamble as I let him in, about Lillian and what Dad told us about Grandpa and all of it. I waited, and used to seeing my normally confident brother so uncertain. I think I've been part of the problem, he finally continued. I accepted the family narrative without question because it was easier, more flattering to our ego. It's what we were taught, I offered, not quite ready to absolve him but appreciating the effort. He shook his head. That's no excuse. I saw how they treated Lillian at that Thanksgiving dinner. I knew it was wrong, but I said nothing, did nothing. His admission, so uncharacteristic of the brother who had always aligned himself with our parents, opened a door between us that I thought had been permanently closed. What changed? I asked. Becoming a father, maybe. He looked down at his hands. I keep thinking about what stories I'm teaching my kids. What kind of example I'm setting. If I want them to grow up thinking money and status are more important than decency and truth. We talked for hours that night, really talked perhaps for the first time since childhood. By the time he left, something had shifted, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. My relationship with my parents evolved more slowly. Their first attempt at making amends came in the form of a formal dinner invitation extended to Lillian, not at their home, but at the Chicago Arts Club, a public acknowledgement of her importance. She accepted graciously, though she confided to me beforehand, I'm going for you, dear, not for them. And perhaps a bit for Ellen's memory. That dinner was stilted but civil, with my mother making visible efforts to engage Lillian in genuine conversation. My father, ever the businessman, proposed establishing a scholarship in Harold and Lillian Campbell's name at the university where Lillian had taught, a gesture both generous and safely public. Lillian thanked him but then added quietly, "What would mean more to me, Timothy, is seeing you develop a real relationship with your daughter. Amber deserves that far more than I deserve any scholarship." His discomfort was evident, but something in her words seemed to reach him. The following week, he invited me to lunch, just the two of us, no business agenda. We spoke awkwardly at first, then with increasing honesty about expectations, disappointments, and the possibility of something better. "I'm not good at this," he admitted after our third such lunch. Emotional conversations. Vulnerability. Your grandfather considered a weakness. "I know," I told him, "but I don't." Slowly, lunch by lunch, we began constructing a relationship based on who we actually were rather than who he thought I should be. It remains a work in progress, but a genuine one. The most profound transformation, however, happened between Lillian and Catherine. Their reconciliation began tentatively, coffee once a month, brief phone calls, careful navigation around old wounds. Catherine's corporate exterior cracked gradually, revealing glimpses of the daughter who had once been close to her mother before ambition and a charismatic husband pulled her into a different world. 6 months after our confrontation, Catherine invited Lillian to her home for dinner, a significant step. Afterward, Lillian called me, her voice thick with emotion. "She has Harold's photographs on her wall," she told me wonderingly. "All these years, I thought she'd erased us from her life, but she kept his photographs." By Christmas, they had established a fragile but healing relationship. Catherine attended our holiday gathering, now held at my home rather than my parents', with Lillian as the guest of honor. Watching them together, their similar mannerisms and shared expressions visible despite years of estrangement, I felt a bittersweet gratitude for the birthday that had set everything in motion. Perhaps the most unexpected change came within Nelson Investments itself. My father, after extensive soul-searching and several long conversations with both Lillian and Catherine, made a public acknowledgement of the Campbell family's role in saving the company during its darkest hour. The updated company history, published on their website and in their annual report, finally gave credit where it had long been due. "Your grandfather would be rolling in his grave," my mother remarked when the announcement was made. "Maybe," my father replied thoughtfully. "Or maybe he'd finally be free of the shame that drove him to hide the truth in the first place." As for me, I found my own priorities shifting. The promotion that had once consumed my every waking hour no longer seemed worth the sacrifice of my personal relationships. I didn't quit. I still loved the creative challenges of marketing, but I established boundaries, reclaiming my Sundays for dinner with Lillian, making time for the people who mattered. When my company opened a satellite office in Milwaukee, I recommended Cynthia, Lillian's niece who had flown in for the birthday celebration, for a position that matched her qualifications. She got the job on her own merits, but the connection would never have happened without that impulsive birthday party. Small ripples of change, spreading outward. Which brings me to yesterday, Lillian's 76th birthday. Unlike last year's forgotten milestone, this celebration had been planned for months. My parents hosted at their home, with every detail arranged to make Lillian feel honored. Catherine came with news of a foundation she was establishing in her father's name to support education in underserved communities, a tribute to both her parents' teaching backgrounds that brought tears to Lillian's eyes. Most moving was the moment my father raised his glass for a toast. The man who had once been too proud to acknowledge Lillian's contribution to our family now stood before friends and relatives alike and said simply, "To Lillian, who taught us that true family is built on honesty, generosity, and love, not bloodlines or balance sheets. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave you every reason to." Lillian, radiant in a new dress Catherine had helped her select, squeezed my hand under the table. "From forgotten birthday to all of this," she whispered. "Quite a journey. Indeed it has been." The journey hasn't always been smooth. Real healing rarely is. There have been difficult conversations, setbacks, moments when old patterns threaten to reassert themselves. But the foundation of secrecy and pretense that our family was built upon has been replaced with something sturdier, if less impressive from the outside: truth, accountability, and genuine care. I've learned that sometimes it takes breaking something apart to rebuild it stronger. That acknowledgement of past wrongs doesn't diminish us, but creates space for something more authentic to grow. That family, real family, is defined not by shared DNA or social standing, but by who shows up, who remembers, who values you for exactly who you are. And I've learned that it's never too late to right a wrong, heal a rift, or tell someone how much they matter. A lesson I hope I never forget. So if you're watching this and there's someone in your life who deserves acknowledgement, someone whose birthday might be approaching, someone who has shaped you in ways you've never properly expressed, don't wait. Don't assume there will always be time. Make the call. Plan the celebration. Speak the truth. Some relationships can't be mended, and that's its own kind of truth to accept. But many can, if we're brave enough to try. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of family, forgiveness, and finding what truly matters. I'd love to know in the comments, what relationships in your life deserve more acknowledgement? What truths need speaking? What birthdays should never be forgotten? Because sometimes it's the forgotten celebrations that lead us to the most important discoveries about our families and about ourselves.